since, yeah, we'll see. So this is a fairly, this is a bit of a cut down of a presentation. Let's go back. It covers basically getting started with doing some Drupal module development. We'll also cover why you may not want to do Drupal module development and some other places to look before you start actually writing code. It assumes a basic understanding of PHP, nothing extravagant. If you know PHP at all, you'll probably be fine. And it really doesn't take a lot of PHP to get started doing some basic modules and so on. But you may not want to write modules, and it starts off with the fact that there are a whole bunch of modules already contributed in the Drupal community. And so one of the very first things to do is to go check out Drupal.org and look and see if one of the more than 4,000 other modules that other people have already written might do some of the same things that you are considering doing. And in many cases, you'll find modules that may do 2 or 3 modules that might do something that you're looking for. And in other cases, you will find 5 to 10, each of which have done it somewhat differently and implemented it a little differently. I'm not sure. And so this gives you, lots of opportunity to do things without necessarily needing to write code. Although you may need some customizations for yours specifically, and need to do extra, kind of add-on modules or modify the way that modules already work. And one of the important parts of this is to, talk to other people in the community, talk to those people who have modules that maybe look like they're similar to what you're thinking about doing but don't work the same way. Find out why. Find out why they went the way that they did. What did they learn while they were developing it? Maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate. Maybe it's just a different use case that's different enough that you want to do something a little different. And one case in particular, I'd come up with an idea for a module, and I don't even remember exactly what it was, but I went through and thought about it off and on for a couple of months and thought, oh, we really need a module for this. And I asked around, I made some posts, and nobody, and I asked several different times on IRC, and nobody could point out anything that really looked like it did this. So I set aside some time one Friday night, and I was sitting down to start writing the module, and I thought, before I start coding, I'll just one last time go ask an IRC to see if anybody has any ideas. So I go ask an IRC, and lo and behold, somebody says, oh, you mean like this? And points to a project that does exactly what I was about to start doing, but just that I hadn't found, because I used some different language around describing what it did, but it was functionally equivalent. So certainly talk to people, listen to their stories, figure out what's going on in the community. So we're going to look at examples from several different sites, and just quickly goes through the sites. So Drupal.org, we have some specific things that expose blocks and use custom filters that we'll talk a little bit about. The DrupalCon site has a virtual whiteboard functionality that we'll talk about. And some of you may have seen something similar, which we'll also briefly touch on. And then our own Acquia.com site. So this is the vendor disclaimer. I do work for Acquia, and we are a sponsor. I'm not going to talk much about Acquia. I'll be happy to answer questions and certainly be happy to talk to people about it elsewhere, but this is not about an Acquia talk. So why would you want to write your own module? Well, the key is that you can change just about anything in Drupal without having to hack somebody else's code. Be that Drupal core or be that a well-written module of another sort. And you can reuse a lot of the great things that are already in Drupal. So it has form validation functions, and it has all sorts of hooks already there. It has functions for sending out email. So instead of having to write your own functions for sending out email, you can change the way that it formats or the way that it sends out email to suit your specific case without having to do things. So you can continue to upgrade core, you can continue to upgrade your other modules and not have to worry about, oops, did we make that change? Do we have to go back and change that all over again? So what is a module? As base, a module consists of 2 files that you have to have, and they have to be in the right directory. There's a .info file, which is basically a .ini type file, just a simple text file with a few lines of text in it. And there is a .module file, which is the actual PHP file. And the part that is important is that they have to have the same name. So in this case, our module name is Drupaltown. So they have to have the same canonical or short name. There can be other files, there can be other things, but this is, at its core, what you need to have a module. In modules, generally, we're implementing hooks. So what are these hook things? Well, hooks are basically integration points. And they are the place where modules and Drupal core allow themselves to say, here's a point where I'm about to do something, and I want to allow any other module that wants to affect the way that I'm going to do this. So I'm about to send out an email. Does anybody want to change the formatting of the email? I'm about to display a page to the person browsing the website. Does anybody want to change that? I'm about to save some data to the database. Anybody want to change it or know about it? And they follow a naming convention or naming pattern. So one of the simplest hooks is hook perm. This allows you to set new permissions that are going to be available on the site. And in this case, we have hook perm, and we're in a module. This particular module name is lists. And so we have a function here called list perm, and it's going to add a permission post to newsletter. And so with this function, this 3 lines of code, we now have on our permissions grid within Drupal a new permission called post to newsletter that can be set for any role. This does not actually do anything with that permission. It simply provides a place for somebody to set this permission and set which roles have this permission. If you want to actually do something with it, that's up to another hook in your module that you'll use as far as checking the access. So what does this actually look like as a module? In our site's all modules list folder, we create 2 files, a list.info and a list.module. And list.info consists basically of these 3 lines. That's Elmer's contribution.
There's headphone in the mic jacket.
So the list.info file consists basically of these 3 lines. And these are the 3 lines that you're required to have. The name of the module, we're going to call it newsletter handler, description. The description is going to show up on the module's listing page so that people know what it does when they're administering the site, and what version of Drupal core it works with. In this case, Drupal core 6 something. The next part is the actual module file itself, list.module. And this is just a simple PHP file, and consists, in this case, mostly actually of comment, and then the function that we just looked at as far as list perm that implements the permission. So this is, all by itself, a complete module. Doesn't do much, it just adds a permissions to the grid of possible permissions available for the site, and doesn't actually implement it. But that in and of itself is a complete module. So let's actually look at using this then, and we're going to use a hook called hook link, because when we look at a post in Drupal, we notice that we have the post, and then we have some comments down here. If you notice below the comment in the bottom left is a delete link, so that I can actually delete this comment while I'm looking at it. But if I wanted to delete the post itself, I'd have to click on the Edit tab and go into the Edit screen and then click on Delete. So we want to modify this. So we want to take and add a delete link next to the Add New Comment link so that it mirrors the way that the actual comment section of this works. So I can delete the node from right there. So I'm going to implement, in this case, hook link, because the hook link is what provides those links at the bottom of anything. And we're going to call this module quick link. So here I have the declaration that's a function quick link underscore link. And it's going to take the same arguments that link expects. So it's going to take type, object, and a boolean about whether it's a teaser or not. Then we're going to say if we're actually displaying a node and the user has permissions to administer the node, then we want to add an element to the links array called quick link node delete. And this is then a fairly simple case of defining the link, which is going to have the title, the href, or where it actually points to, and then any attributes. So we're going to set a title attribute on it so that it will, in most browsers, when you hover over it, it will pop up some descriptive text saying what it actually does. And we're going to return that variable. So again, just a simple 20 lines of code. And now, when we look at our post, we see that we have a delete this post link at the bottom of our post. And when we hover over it, we see jump to deleting this post, which we'd set as the title in there. Okay, any questions? And do feel free to ask any questions. I have a number of examples, and we can get to all of them, or some of them, or a few of them.
Joshua, is there a listing in Drupal of all the different hooks and what syntax they're expecting? And
There is a, so the question you made in here is there a list of all the different hooks and the syntax they're expressing? One of the things I have in the extra resource, or in the list of places to go next, is api.drupal.org, which has that for Drupal core. The other place I would point you to today is api.lolobot.com, where they have Drupal core plus a lot of contributed modules.
the search works better.
And search works better, and it's got some nice features. And the other thing which we'll get to is also, I actually have a couple slides on spotting the hooks and how to find where hooks are implemented, because both of those sites depend on how well documented it is. And Drupal core is pretty well documented. Contrib ranges from pretty well documented to
non-existent.
Find the random hook that somebody implemented and didn't document whatsoever.
Okay, thanks.
So the next one we'll look at is the contact form. And Drupal core has a contact module that allows you to have a form on your site that looks something like this by default, and would allow a user visiting your site to type in their name and email address, and it will actually generate an email to an address, but it does all of this without exposing the email address of the person it's sending it to. And it could be an email list, it could be any number of things. But there are a few things that we want to change about this form. We want to move where the category is. We also actually are going to set the category based on the path that someone uses to get to this form. So if they're in a particular section of our site and wanting to know about exhibiting, then they'll get a form that's already preset to the exhibiting category. And then the message area is a little squished. We want to make some more room so that it's a little easier to type in there. So in this case, we're going to use a very common function, and this is one of probably one of the functions where you would spend just a whole lot of time, especially early on. This is hook form alter. And this particular hook allows us to, at all sorts of states along the way, from the very early states of building a form and creating the elements that are going to be on the form, to validating the form, to processing the form, and actually saving the data in the database to generate changes or to alter the way that that form is presented. So we start off simply with a Drupaltown form alter function that's going to take the form as its input and the form state and the form ID. And we're going to do a simple test and say if the form ID is the contact mail page, because that's the only form that we want to make these changes to, then we're going to change some elements on the form. We're going to set the message number of rows to be 20. So this is going to expand our form so that it's a little taller and easier to type on. We're also going to move the category to the top of the page. So the form category information weight, we're going to make -2 so that it floats up to the top of the page. And the category ID we're going to set to weight of -1, or the contact ID so it's -1, so it's below that on the page. Next, we're going to set, based on the ID, what the default argument is going to be, or what the default selection in that dropdown is going to be. So if the category ID is general, it's going to be the first option on the form, but if they're in the exhibition section, it's going to be option 2. And so then we can figure out what the category is using the arg function. This is a Drupal function, arg1, just saying take the first part of the URL and essentially we're looking at where we are. And if that argument is exhibitions, then we're going to set it to, if it's general, we'll set it to 1, otherwise we'll just use the default that already exists in the form. Okay? So now we have, when we visit the URL contact exhibitions, we see that we have a larger message area because we set that up to 20. And we see that the category, which has been moved up the page, is also set to be exhibitions. So it's pre-selected. It's still changeable. So if somebody says, "Oh, I don't really," although I'm in this section, I don't really want to send a message about exhibitions, they can still change it, but it's just preset. Now we could have at the same time changed that so that they're not even going to see that, and we're going to just send it automatically to exhibitions, again in that same hook form alter function. Any questions on that?
So let's say you're designing a theme for your site, you've moved into Drupal, and now you're doing these kinds of like tweak things that you want to do it to make it better for what you have. Would you usually have one module that's your law school like tweak module that there's just little stuff that you want to do, but it would have like 15 or 20 different hooks in it? Or would you recommend more having a module for each individual kind of section, like your contact form section, have a module for your law school tweaks for that area and moving forward?
Frequently you will have multiple tweaks, what I would say, in one module. What generally can drive that more, especially if you're doing multiple sites using the same set of code, is what sorts of things make sense to turn on together. So if we have a whole section of functions related to, say, altering the way that our the conference section of the site looks, then it probably makes sense to build a conference module. So we have law school conference and do our alterations, any number of hooks, any number of things that we're going to do related to conferences in that section. We might have a separate section for faculty, for the ways that we want to change faculty profiles and the ways that we want to change display of faculty modules and ability to draw a picture, overwrite their faculty pictures and funny faces and things like that would all be in the faculty module. There are some other ways of doing it. Certainly you could divide it up by hooks. That's probably not as intuitive, at least to me, when I go in to look at the modules and say, oh, okay, I need to look at this module for this and this module for this. I'd rather see all my faculty functions together, all of my student functions together, conferences, whatever makes sense. You can do it all in one module as well. It's really a matter of, you know, are you going to want to at some point maybe split that off and have functions, you know, in a module, say a separate conference site, where you would enable the conference module but maybe not enable the admin module. So hook form alter, very, yeah, like I said, probably one of the most widely used, if not the most widely used. And I'll point out one of the things, and there's on the API sites, there's a lot of documentation on the form system. Because of the way forms are built and passed in Drupal, there are some really nice functions. One of them are attributes that you can set on fields. One of them is that you can have a field that's a value field. And a value field is somewhat like a hidden field, except it's never actually displayed to the browser. So it's kept completely on the Drupal side. So if you want to prevent people from doing things like, say, changing the price on your checkout cart, where a lot of places use hidden fields for that, you know, you can do it by passing a value field that will never actually hit the browser, so you can keep it all on the server side. So next, interesting idea, a digital whiteboard. Like if you wanted to have a whiteboard so that people could leave little notes and things at the conference, and you weren't going to be centralized and you were all over the place and wanted people to easily be able to do this. So this is the whiteboard module. It basically allows people to enter nodes and then affects the display of them. This is done through hook menu, and the menu system is what in Drupal sets all of the paths and routes where things go. So in this case, we're going to create a URL /whiteboard that gives a definition, and then in that we're going to set what the page callback is. Now this is the function that when somebody visits the URL, it is going to be executed, in this case, Drupaltown whiteboard page, and what access arguments are going to apply. So we're going to allow anybody who has the access content permission to view this page. The actual function itself looks like this. So we have the Drupaltown whiteboard page, which was the callback function that we gave. It is going to do a query on the database and select the nodes for the whiteboard that are published. And then it's going to generate output. This is, as we'll look at, one of the first cases of do as I say, not as I do. This would make me quite unhappy if I was finding this module and trying to extend it, because here in this function is hard-coded HTML that is being wrapped around this function. So there's another whole thing that applies here, in that anytime you have a module that is generating HTML that is sticking into the module, it really should be in a theme function. And so if I was evaluating this module to use on my site, this is kind of a thing that jumps out at me and says, wait a minute, this should be in a theme function. The reason for that being that as it's written, I cannot change the divs that are around this. So I'm stuck with Drupaltown Whiteboard as the div. Now this is a module developed for one specific site, and as we'll see in a moment, isn't the way to do this anyway, but the problem is if this was a contributed module, I would then in my CSS be stuck with this div, Drupaltown Whiteboard, and I wouldn't be able to change it or alter it in any way if I needed to do something that I needed to apply site-wide. So that aside, we then have an output function that generates the div and fetches each of the nodes in and puts the title and the body of the node, displaying just the teaser of the node, and returns that output, which is what Drupal is expecting and is then going to generate as a page. Finally, actually before this, we have the Drupal Add Css function that is going to add in our specific style sheet for our module. And that Drupal Add Css function is important because although we can add the CSS in other ways, Drupal has an aggregate CSS function that you need to have on all of your production sites. If you don't, you need to go check that. And it's important because any module, including a little 35-line module like this, can add its own CSS. And you can end up then, depending on how many modules you have on, with anywhere from 5 to 45 or 50 or 60 CSS style sheets being added in if you're defining them. For those of you that don't know, Internet Explorer has a feature where it stops rendering CSS style sheets arbitrarily. It will render no more than 30, and sometimes fewer than 30. So what ends up happening is that if you don't turn on aggregation and bunch those all up into one file, the module CSS files that are up at the top will get loaded. The theme-specific ones, where you've done a lot of work to make your site look like you want it to, at the bottom of the list won't get loaded. And people with IE will complain. If that's important to you. So, back to the module. The CSS file that we're adding in, it simply takes the div that we just added and formats each of the nodes based on it. The main difference being that we're changing the title. So if the node is set to be sticky, which is one of the options in Drupal that you can check off, it's going to have an orange border around it instead of the gray border that every other node is going to have. And so what we end up with is something that looks kind of like this. Now, as I mentioned at the top, you don't always need to write a module. And this is a case where really writing a module is probably not the right thing to do. And in fact, what you should probably be doing is using views, because this is simply a list of modules. And views very well provides lists of modules. And it works with a lot of other functions. Instead of just calling in the title and the body, we get other things, like if we have 5-star ratings turned on so that people can rate content, those will be applied here if we want them to be applied. Whereas they are not in our example module. And for example, if you were to use views, you could build a virtual whiteboard that looks something like this, which is filled with views, very similar CSS, but the CSS is the only piece that just some CSS was added in to handle the actual size and display, make the sticky ones have a red border around them. But far easier, far more reusable, and a much better way of actually handling this problem. Any thoughts, questions? All right. So one of the last ones we'll talk about is making Drupal not look like Drupal. So Drupal by default, when you install it, has this wonderful page, and that page is available at whatever site name /node. And /node is a list then of all of the nodes that are on your site. Now there's a configuration option where you can set what your front page is going to be. So you can set your front page not to be /node, but instead to be /node1 or /myFavoriteView or whatever you want it to be, where you've generated something else that you want displayed instead. And that's fine, that works. However, once you do that, /node is still there and is still displaying a list of the published nodes on your site, which may not be something that you want just anybody to go look around, because Elmer might be looking around on your site and go find something that you don't want him to see. Hi, Elmer. So this is, and these line numbers, I'll put the slides up. These line numbers, by the way, are actual line numbers from the various modules. So this is the implementation of hook menu in Drupal core that creates that item. So we have the item node, again, that's going to be the path. And we have these access arguments that say anybody who can access content and can see this. So we can have our own little module that implements the hook menu alter that menu, change that menu. And in this, we're going to simply say, this is our undrupal module. Again, the hook is menu alter. And we're simply going to say that the node access callback is going to be set to false. So it will never evaluate to true, and nobody can see that URL. Okay. Pretty short, simple way of overriding what's in Drupal core, so I don't have to go, hack any modules in Drupal core or change anything in core. I can still upgrade core as long as this module's turned on. It's going to continue to work. Any questions? Make some sense? Okay. And going back to your question, how do we find where our hooks are? Well, obviously we can use things like the API sites that help document them. If you're using an IDE that automatically goes out and generates lists of all the available functions, that will sometimes help you find those. But there are basically two function calls that define hooks in Drupal. And so you can also look for those. This particular one comes from the moderate module, which maintains a list of the moderated content. And when somebody, as an administrator, approves that content or updates that content, it provides other modules with a way to also, say, log functions or take a further action based on what's just been logged. And it does that using the module invoke all call. And so this is defining a hook called moderate _ log. And I could define hook moderate, or I could use the function hook moderate log in any of my modules to do something else based on the fact that a module has just run this. And so that would expect an op, a nid, a values, and a message as its arguments being passed into that hook. The other way is a function called Drupal alter. This is the clone module, which allows you to clone existing content, and it implements Drupal alter. And in this case, this is around menu, but allows you to define a different setup. So by default, alter content is basically or a clone content is basically a site-wide sort of thing. You can give a role permission to clone content or not. If we wanted to come back to, we want to further restrict that so that we only have a template node type, and only template nodes can be cloned. We want to implement our own special access callback, and so we could effectively hook clone access and change the way that function goes. So where do we go for more? There's a few places. One is, again, I'll post the comments on this and duplicates of this one. The other is to look at the pants module tutorial, which is a version of this talk from a couple of years ago. Similar thing about kind of getting started and doing some module development. You can, of course, come talk to Acquia, and this is the obligatory marketing slide that I stuck in. Hopefully, oops. Sorry.
Double marketing.
That wasn't intentional at all.
No. The Drupal.org contributors guide has a lot of documentation about getting started on developing modules, developing themes, developing different things you might want to look at. The api.drupal.org. I mentioned but don't have in here api.lolobot.com, which again has fixed some of the annoying search bugs. It does not, however, have the Drupal 4 reference on there. Very sad to say. So,
It shouldn't be using Drupal 4.
Is anybody using it?
if you're looking for Drupal 4 or Drupal 5 reference, there's another conversation we need to have.
Yes.
And it's not this one, so we'll talk later. It's got really powerful, as well as it's got some great reference sorts of documents, such as form generation. There's a whole section on the form API. There's several pages on form API that will make your mind explode the first several times you try to read them, but have lots of good information. IRC, Drupal, pound Drupal on irc.freenode. The Drupal community uses IRC extensively. You can, any time of day or night, go talk to all sorts of people who have a great deal of experience in Drupal. There are, I don't know, 30-some odd channels covering everything from specifics and so on, but Pound Drupal is the hub, and kind of where it starts there. There are a number of books out. One of these books is great. The Pro Drupal development book is fantastic. It's pretty much the Bible of getting started in Drupal development. So if you're interested, make sure that you pick up the second edition, which covers Drupal 6. If you pick up the first edition, you'll learn a lot about history, and some of it will be applicable, but you'll learn far more about history than you want as well. Learn about using revision control if you're not already. That's probably the other module, is if you're not familiar with version control, then you need to have that discussion before you get much into module development. And don't hack core. And this is more than just a...
Yeah, really don't hack core. One more time.
And it's not a link.
Are you going to put the slides up?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, all the speakers are encouraged to attach their slides to their session descriptions. Like 3 have. One's complaining he couldn't do it. That was my fault.
I'll show you don'thackcore.com, except it's currently just a Media Temple default site. There are pretty kittens of kittens in the explanation that hacking core kills kittens. So Drupal community likes kittens, don't kill kittens. Don't hack core. Don't hack contrib. You know, unless you're developing a patch or something, you know, it's going to extend a module and you can contribute that patch back. There's really not a great reason for hacking contrib. Now, sometimes you get stuck in a place where they haven't implemented a hook, or maybe they should have, and so you need to contribute and talk to them about a hook and see if there's a better way to implement that as an API. Anybody other than Elmer have questions?
Yeah, because I don't know what happens if they do something stupid in contrib. Just
Yeah.
offhand.
Not that you'd have experience with it.
Yeah, do when they do stupid stuff in contrib. Yeah.
That's why there's issue queues associated with every
Yeah, and some of those are only,
module. And
That's
yeah,
right.
again, and it's, you know, different module maintainers react differently to suggestions. There was a case recently with a module that has several thousand sites using it, and the module maintainer didn't really want to listen to some fairly constructive feedback, like it's a bad thing to rebuild the cache of, you know, upwards of 10,000 lines every time somebody loads a page on the site. And they really weren't listening to and weren't hearing somebody in the community who was trying to provide feedback. And WebChick, who's kind of one of the rock stars in the community, came along, tried to implement this module, pulled her hair out when she realized what it was doing, and went to talk to the contributor who was maintaining it, and said, you really shouldn't do this way. And this function that you have here is bad, you shouldn't do things. So the contributor went and deleted that function and committed the module with that function deleted. Now, the module no longer worked at that point, because that function was critical to what they were trying to do. So you do find wild, woolly things in the trip. Any other thoughts, questions? I do have at least one more example we can walk through if people want. Elmer can come up and give his part of the presentation.
Hey. Or you can ask Elmer questions directly. See how that works.
Yeah, right.
How about, do you have a presentation?
I got a little backlog in this whole webcasting thing today, so I'm grossly unprepared. However, if you check the agenda online, you'll note that I have been removed as a speaker in this session.
Which happened about 5 minutes ago?
Actually, that was about a half hour ago, but yeah, it's recently, but yes.
So we deleted Elmer from Contrib.
No, it was not deleted from the entire conference.
Don't hack Elmer.
That's right, if you show up for the cloud computing session on Friday afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, you'll also see me not participate in that. So it's kind of a trend. Now, I might actually have stuff to contribute to that.
Hey, walk us through another one, Josh.
Or I can show you like some of the scary modules I can do.
As examples, how not to.
Well, I've actually been I've been porting the stuff that we've been doing in PHP anyway, in Fusebox actually for our existing website, into Drupal modules. And it's actually not that difficult, because a database query is a database query, and it's actually easier. I've so far found that for every 30 lines of Fusebox, I'm generating about 15 lines of Drupal module code. Weirdly enough. And that has a lot to do with the built-in functions in Drupal that I've just been able to cut out of what we were doing in Fusebox, where we were writing everything from the ground up. So it's actually been kind of cool. So if you have a pile of PHP code laying around that actually works, it's not that hard to get it into Drupal modules once you kind of get the hang of the module and just think of it as a framework. And it works it's pretty straightforward.
It's funny, it seems to still be on the.
That's Dave's still.
Must be cache. Clear the cache.
No, it's not cache.
Yeah. Somebody put it out.
Maybe.
It can
Quit
happen.
fooling around, will ya?
Okay, so
I think Elmer should be in it.
another example. This one is taking core search, and in Drupal core, when you do search, you get the wonderful search form. But we're going to take it and modify it so that instead of just the search form, that I have the ability to search based on a content type. Now, this is available if somebody has advanced search capabilities. They can do this anyway. But we're just going to make it easier. We're going to make it so they don't have to go into advanced search. We're going to put a little radio box right here. And that way, when they do the search, we can restrict it, and so that we're only going to search blog content type. And we'll get a list of just blog entries when we do that. And this will actually change the search string and add this type :blog to the search string. So again, this is a form alter. We're going to alter the search box. And we're going to take the core search form in this case basically and re-implement it. So So we have here, we have the form ID, and this is the form ID element. And we're going to change the submit handler, which is down here, and we're going to say instead of using core's search box form submit, that we're going to substitute our own. So this is, we're looking at it here, this is the core function for generating the search box form. And we're going to add into our module a form alter. So again, we're going to alter that form. And we're going to alter the search box form and the search theme form, which is another page, like if it's showing up just on a page all by itself, it'll show up there instead of in the block. And we're going to look for the form ID, and so we're only going to alter, again, the search form. That's what we're doing here. We're going to add a little bit of CSS again so that we can just theme the way that those radio boxes are going to show up and make them not look ugly. We're only going to alter this if we're actually looking at a node page. If we're looking at a view or something else, we're not going to alter the search box in this case. And we're basically then going to take and add to our search the node log type. So this piece of the function is actually doing a few things. We're generating our list of the different content types that are available on the site. In this case, our only content type available is blog, so we're just going to have blog. But this will automatically iterate through and create a radio box for each of the different content types that are available on the site. It's long range phone. So we're going to go through and get a list of and that's the node get types function on line 17. Get a list of the various content types, and then on line 19 we start setting up our list of them, and line 23 and 24 gives us the available options and adds the all content to the list of options. And we're going to change the submit handler. So now instead of using core's submit handler, we're going to instead use our own submit handler, in this case in the site section search submit function. So let's look at this. This is site section search submit. The last two lines of this, line 39 and 40, are from core's search handler. So they're from the same search handler that we're replacing. That's the whole extent of this function. So in this case, it was easy just to copy that 2-line function, and we're going to make it a 4-line function. If it was more complex, then we might have our own search, our own submit function that then calls the one from core instead. But in this case, it was 2 lines. So site section search submit, this is what we set up as the form handler. And we're going to look at the form ID, and we're going to take the section and add the section values in. And we're going to set the path to include that section, type equals whatever section that we want, and submit that through the regular search function. And on so doing, we end up with a form that looks like this. And when we type into that form, and we get the all content, so we get the radio buttons added. And the all content, we have blog, which again is the only content type on this site. That was my last text. One other thing that I'll mention that kind of comes back to the question of creating your own modules. Another thing to be sure and think about whenever you're creating modules or themes is namespace. Drupal has a function for testing whether another module is enabled. So I might run a function that says, if views is enabled, then I want to execute a function that I know is included in views. Or if views is enabled, I just don't want to even deal with this and just pass it off to views to work with this or CCK or whatever. So if you have a case where you're thinking about building a module and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do with this module? Well, I'm going to view content with this module, so I'll create a module called views. That's all well and good, it's perfectly legal, you can do that. However, other modules may run checks to say, is views enabled? And when they run that check to say, is views enabled, they're going to make certain assumptions. That because views is enabled, other functions are available that are declared in views. As a result, you'll get a nice, what we refer to as the white screen of death, nice blank page when you go to load your site. And when you find your PHP logs, you'll find the undeclared function error that caused the page to stop loading because what some module thought was going to be there in the views module wasn't. So you really want to name your modules something that is going to be unique to your site. You know, put your organization name in front of it. Make some of your function names longer, but in the long run you'll be much happier with it. The other is we showed the folder containing one module. And the folder can actually contain many modules. So you may want to have your faculty module and your conference module and all of those things as separate modules. They can all actually be in your same, in the same folder. So you could have your law school folder and have modules within it. Law school is probably a bad name for a module space, just because you might someday download a contributed module or share your modules with some other school. So even including your school name in them is probably, or some set of initials or something in your modules that are going to make it so that there aren't likely to be other schools with the same name. It's probably a good idea. Other questions, comments? That's easy. So, all of the questions, Tom Bruce will be handling, so if you have any other.
We can use the comment form on the session page.